floating is pretty much the most relaxing thing you can ever experience. A float tank is a tank that holds about 10 inches of water, and mixed in with that is 850 pounds of Epsom salt, which makes the water really dense. So you are really buoyant and you get to float, which is really awesome. It makes it so the water comes about just halfway along your body, and your kind of front half and face stay above the water line. The water is your skin temperature, so you start to kind of lose track of where the water even is along your body, kind of enhancing the floating feeling. And those two combined pretty much put you in what feels like a zero gravity environment. And just being in that environment physically for your body is just like amazing, really expedited rest physically for you. And then the sensory deprivation, the fact that it's completely soundproof and pitch black on the inside of the tank, is pretty much the same thing for your brain. It just allows your brain a chance to not have to deal with all the things that it's constantly dealing with and kind of taking in the outside world, and also get a chance to like really rest and relax. Float tanks are kind of crazy in that they just have like sweeping benefits over a bunch of different directions. So there's lots of like physical benefits. Just being in an environment where gravity isn't pushing down on you all the time allows your body to take care of itself. You just have a ton of resources that your body will then use once you have them to like muscles rest, and like your bones kind of rest a lot faster than they do otherwise. Injuries actually heal faster in there. You're an inch taller while you're floating as your spine is decompressing and all your joints are opening up. So it's amazing for like arthritis or fibromyalgia or any sort of like physical ailment. It also allows you to just like train your body harder because you can literally like rest faster between training sessions.
Psychologically, it's good for stress. Just a lot of people, anxiety, PTSD, a lot of recovery from that. Helps with getting better sleep, which is also very helpful for being able to tolerate stress.
But I get largely a huge physical benefit from floating. Just the amount of rest that I get on my body is really incredible, and I start to notice it after about a week of not floating. Those little aches and pains start coming back, which floating about 2 to 3 times a week, which is what I do. At this point, they've just become really unfamiliar to me. I'm not used to being uncomfortable in my body at all, just because of the rest it provides. And also just the kind of de-stressing factor as well of being in the float tank. Your brain starts to naturally calm your entire system down when you're in there. And I noticed that as well, like I'm just generally less tense and less irritable, and it's really it's just kind of a pleasure going through every day when you're floating regularly.
It showed me how my body really is. Like, you know, I'm sitting down like this, I'm kind of a lanky guy, so I'm always kind of, you know, moving myself around, but just to have it in its natural, just was very, 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 very cool.
Physically, actually, your spine just decompresses an inch and your muscles get to fully relax in there because they're not fighting gravity, which is pretty amazing. And on a mental, just kind of chemistry level, I suppose, a lot of changes start to happen. Your entire adrenal system almost goes into dormancy and just kind of takes a back seat, which is our fight or flight response, and a lot of the things that require really quick action. And our cortisol production, which is our stress hormone, drops down to almost nothing while you're in there, and instead your brain starts churning out dopamine and endorphins, which are our feel-good neurotransmitters basically, and you just get this really natural mood high which lasts for about 2 to 3 days afterwards, which is pretty wonderful.
It seemed like a time to like love myself, and I really felt my body, and like I could you know, hear like my pulses and my blood running, and I could just take the time to appreciate all that my body does for me, and just let it do it, you know, without getting in the way.
Another kind of crazy thing that starts to happen in the float tanks is a lot of people get visualizations while they're in there. Visual hallucinations or auditory hallucinations as well can happen. which doesn't happen to everyone, and definitely I'd say is the minority of people on their first time, which is kind of interesting. Some people have just heard the Joe Rogan podcasts about him like flying through space and doing really crazy things in the float tanks, which is actually the experience for some people. Some were born to float, and they just hop in there and immediately just like takes off and they're flying through a star field. But I think the much more common, much more practical benefits involve that kind of rest to your brain and rest to your body, and the visuals and auditory hallucinations are a nice side benefit when and if they turn up.
I didn't know if my eyes were open or shut for part of the time, and I was seeing like sky scenes, like completely not what I've seen before.
Generally, after about 45 minutes, on average, kind of for your first float, your brain waves actually change their frequency. In your day-to-day, you kind of run in your beta and alpha waves, which is the really high-frequency brain wave. And in your deep, like REM sleep, you run in your delta waves, which is the lowest frequency. And in between are the theta waves. And those happen to you every night, kind of like the 5 minutes before you fall asleep and 5 minutes after you wake up feeling. But the tank gives you a prolonged time in the theta state. Which is really nice and not something we're used to really experiencing. So it kind of just helps boost that right hemisphere stuff like creativity and inspiration and non-linear thought. It helps kind of like quiet the left side down a tiny bit. So like your inner monologue will kind of like start to be quiet, which is a big relief for a lot of people. And just you kind of get an out-of-body experience from having your left hemisphere quiet down a little bit too.
One common thing that people are a little nervous about, I guess, going into the float tanks is claustrophobia, which turns out not to be an issue at all, which is really nice. Once you actually get in the float tank and shut the door and you're in that pitch black space with the water at skin temperature, it feels more like floating in outer space than it does like being in a box or in a float tank. The entire surroundings kind of disappear and it really feels like you're in a giant void. And also there's not any latches on the doors, much less locks or anything to keep you in there, so you're always in complete control of your environment and can get out at any time. And even people with relatively extreme claustrophobia who we've floated haven't had any problem inside the tanks.
Yeah, another concern we run into is people wondering if they can or will fall asleep, which can happen, rarely. I think more people think they fell asleep than actually do. But the part that generally gets left out, but what they're really asking is, am I going to drown? Am I safe if I fall asleep? Which you just cannot flip over. The water is absurdly dense. You can even try and flip yourself over and it's not going to happen, let alone involuntary flipping while falling asleep. So it can happen. It doesn't happen often, but it's not something to be concerned about either way.
So our basic float is 90 minutes long, which actually sounds a lot longer than it actually feels. It feels like maybe 30 or 40 minutes when you're actually inside the tank, and that runs $50. And then we also have late night floats, which are 2.5 hours long for $60, and it just kind of ranges a little bit, but generally around that price range. And then we also have a few cool programs too that we run, one of which is our volunteer program, which you can volunteer 4 hours in the shop and get a free float. And you can also do barter for almost anything. We have one person who comes in and trades us pastries a few times a week and then floats a couple times as well. We trade all of the teas that we have in shop for floats. Literally almost anything you can barter for. Yeah, and the goal with the pricing, I guess, is just to make sure that anyone can float as often as they want, regardless of how much money they actually have. It's something that we just, from the very beginning, knew that we wanted to make available to anyone.